Today we're pleased to have Matt Amick from the Missouri Corn Growers Association here to make a presentation with Jeff Seeley. Matt.
Thank you. All right, well, I appreciate it. He introduced me, and basically what I do is I work for the Missouri Corn Growers Association. I'm a field rep for the eastern half of the state. Just to kind of give you my background a little bit, I grew up on a cattle farm just southwest of Jefferson City. So that's kind of where my background is. We're based out of Jeff City. A lot of what we do is policy work, but I'll get into that. Before we begin, can everyone stand up, please? Real quick. Feel activity going. All right. So I want you to remain standing if you know someone that farms, full-time or part-time. Pretty much everybody knows somebody. Okay. Remain standing if you know someone, if you have a direct relative that farms, maybe a cousin, brother, father. Half go down. Okay. Now remain standing if you farm full-time or part-time yourself. So we have one farmer in the crowd.
Yay, Larry.
All right. So why did I do that activity? Well, basically what I'm trying to show you is, although we have a lot of connections back to the farm, we have direct relatives, we know some of the farms, oftentimes that knowledge has been lost, and we only have one farmer that actually farms, but we have a close relationship with farmers because we all eat, and we all drive, so we all use the fuel that's produced by corn, we all use the food that's corn produces. So just kind of give you an overview of what we do. We've got two entities. The Missouri Corn Growers Association, which is focused on policy. We do policy and regulations in the state of Missouri and Washington, D.C. And the other entity, which is the same staff, is the Merchandising Council. And that is basically every bushel of corn that's sold in the state of Missouri, 1 cent is taken off that bushel and given to our organization, and we use it for market development, communications, research, and education. That's basically what I do. I'm a marketing, PR, communications. So, just to give you an overview of the Missouri corn industry, or Missouri corn crop, last year we had some issues with dryness, drought, no rain, it was very hot. So normally we had a big acreage planted, but we had a lower crop than normal. We usually have a crop in the range of 350 to 400 million bushels, and we're at 250. We usually have an average yield of about 130. In the 130s, we're about 75. And a lot of those averages were pulled up from southeast Missouri. So besides southeast Missouri, because it's largely irrigated, up north, we're talking pretty much zilch. So this graph on the right is for Larry back there. He asked me, what percentage of the corn is actually used for ethanol, which I'll talk about here in a minute. Our number one customer in the U.S. and Missouri is still livestock. In the U.S. or Missouri, we utilize over 50% of the crop for livestock. That green part, that 8%, that's what's called distiller's grains, and it's a byproduct from the ethanol process. I'll go into that as well, but once you return that back into the feed supply, the actual amount of corn that's used for livestock is number one, livestock. We use about 25% for ethanol, and the rest is exported. Or used for residual uses, different types of, we were talking about cornstarch. Corn is almost in every product out there, it seems like. So, back to how this relates to you. There was one farmer in the crowd, he raises cattle. He does feed corn, but how is it affecting you from an economic perspective? Well, here's some numbers from 2011. 65,000 jobs in Missouri alone. Over 4.3 billion in economic output, over 300 million in tax contributions going to our schools, going to our roads. So a big impact from the corn industry side. And if you didn't know, ag is our number one industry in the state. All of ag. Cattle is our number one industry in the ag industry. So this slide is very important because it shows you, there's been a lot of talk recently about how much commodity prices in recent years have risen. And a lot of talk from the national media, from consumers, questions about how much these high commodity prices are affecting their food prices. And it's a legitimate question. And when you're at the grocery store and you're paying a certain amount of money for products, you think, wow, these are astronomical. But when we really break it down and take a look at it, I know you can't see this too well from the back, but it shows that only 11.8 cents out of one food dollar is from on-farm costs. The rest is tied up in transportation, packaging, marketing, retailing, wholesaling, you name it. So, you know, everything that's sold, farmers are only getting 11.8 cents of that. And if you look at corn, it's only 1.7 cents. So let's take $7 a bushel of corn, and let's look at a box of corn flakes. Okay, box of corn flakes. How much is a box of corn flakes? $2.50, $3. The amount of corn in that box of corn flakes is 10 cents at $7 a bushel. That's on the high end. As prices lower, the price of corn in a box of corn flakes decreases. And a pound of hamburger, what is hamburger? $2.50, $2? You know, it's a little bit higher. It's about 33 cents, but that's still a very small cost of the overall cost of a pound of hamburger. Only 33 cents tied into corn price. So, and another thing that we've seen is with issues with ethanol and our food going to fuel, or some of our food going to fuel, they talk about food prices rising. Well, the Consumer Price Index that came out this year said that the general food inflation was 1.8%. That is the second lowest food inflation in the last 20 years. The general inflation was 1.7%. Meat, poultry, eggs, major farm products, that inflation was only 1.5%. Those are major farm, lower than the general inflation, lower than the general food inflation. Dairy products only rose 0.5%. Pork prices were actually lower in 2012 than they were in 2011. So where are these costs coming from? Is it the farmer that's benefiting from this, or is it the grocery stores possibly that are jacking up prices, or even worse, the restaurants that are raising food prices and blaming it on high commodity prices, high inputs for farmers? So it's a question we need to ask. You know, we blame the farmers, but we need to ask all of our industry as well as where are these costs coming from? So I talked about ethanol. Les, I believe, talked about how they had the only American-made product in their industry, in the industry. Well, ethanol is an American-made product made out of corn for the most part, and it is our number one most viable competitor to imported oil. So right now we've got about 10% of the fuel market. And so you're looking at ethanol, an American-made product, keeping dollars in America, the most legitimate competitor to big oil. Just a snapshot of the Missouri ethanol industry. We have 6 plants all north of I-70, all in the northern part of the state, that produce about 300 million gallons, about 825 tons of distillers grains. Basically how ethanol is made, in the kernel, they take out the starch. That's a third of the kernel. That's what they use for ethanol. The other third comes out in CO2, carbon dioxide. They trap the carbon dioxide, and they'll sell it to beverage makers, soda companies. And the other third is a byproduct called distillers grains, which is a high-fat, high-protein feed source for cattle. And actually, when distillers grains comes out, it's actually about 130 to 150% more efficient than the corn kernel is going into a cow. So you get more out of your distillers grains than you would a corn kernel. So the ethanol industry is returning a lot of feed back into the feed industry. Here's just the economic impact of the ethanol industry in Missouri. You know, not huge, but it's still a lot. I mean, 1,500 jobs, that's a lot of jobs. 1.1 billion in economic output, 35 billion in tax contributions. So you as consumers, you guys that drive around, you're burning up a lot of gas. Why is ethanol good for you? Why is it important for your gas prices? Well, number one, hard to believe, but it's keeping gas prices in check. Just simple economics, supply and demand. When you add 10% of fuel into the market, we're also decreasing our dependence on foreign oil. ethanol is actually a cheaper alternative to oil. So the oil companies like it. Really, the only reason they like it is it's cheaper for them to blend, and they can blend a lesser quality fuel because ethanol is a high quality fuel and a high octane fuel, and it boosts up their octane to get to that minimum octane requirement. So that's where those cost savings come in. $1.09 per gallon last year. Over $1,200 for each household saved in gas prices, simply because we have 10% ethanol in our fuel. And just so you know, in Missouri, since about 2007, the majority of the fuel in Missouri, as well as most of the United States, contains 10% ethanol. And it's safe for all engines. Car engines, boat engines, small engines, classic cars, it's safe for all. And it's approved for all. I talked about reducing our dependence on foreign oil. This is might be tough to see in the back as well, but it says in 2012, ethanol replaced the need for imported oil by over the equivalent of 462 million barrels. That's more oil than we would import from Saudi Arabia, or import oil than we would, plus some than we'd import from Russia, Kuwait, and Iraq. This equals a cost savings over $50 billion in savings from not having to import foreign oil. And there's a lot of other factors involved with our import of foreign oil that I'm not going to get into, but I think we can understand what those issues are related to. Another benefit of ethanol, cleaner environment. So ethanol is a very oxygenated fuel. So when you burn it through your gas pipe, your tailpipe, the oxygen burns out quicker. It burns more completely, not quicker, it burns more completely. So, meaning less tailpipe emissions coming out of your vehicles. So, in 2012, tough to read as well, 33.4 million metric tons of greenhouse gases were eliminated by ethanol in 2012, or the equivalent of every vehicle in Michigan. That's taking 5.2 million vehicles out of the equation, just because ethanol is in our fuel supply. I talked about distillers grains. I don't want to touch on this very much, but the ethanol industry produces 37 million metric tons. Times that by 40, you'll get how many pounds that is. Actually, times that by 40, that'll give you the bushels. Times that by 56 is how many pounds you get in feed. And that's the equivalent. If we were to take the amount of distillers grains, that is enough feed, that produces enough feed to feed enough cattle that will produce 7 quarter-pound hamburgers for the entire world. For every person on the planet, that will produce 7 quarter-pound hamburgers. The number underneath it says that's enough to feed 200 million people for an entire year, just from the ethanol industry. So from a policy perspective, what's the most important thing for the ethanol industry moving forward? It's called the Renewable Fuel Standard. So in 2005, the first renewable fuel standard was passed by Congress, and what it says is we need to use a certain amount of ethanol in our fuel supply. In 2007, it was amended to add some of the advanced biofuels, the advanced ethanols, the cellulosic ethanols. But in 2013, it says we are required to use 13.8 billion gallons of ethanol in our fuel. And, you know, RFS, it's not just about the ethanol industry, it's about all the things I just talked about. It's a job creator, better economies, more tax dollars, cleaner environment, lower dependence on foreign oil. It's all these things combined. And the reason this is the most important thing is because it has been attacked with the drought this past year. A lot of people blaming ethanol for high food prices, high feed prices. So we've seen a lot of complaints coming from the grocery stores, from the oil companies, talking about how the RFS is bad. Well, actually, since the RFS was enacted in 2005, food inflation has averaged 2.8%. The last 25 years before that, food inflation was 3% on average. So the RFS, repealing the renewable fuel standard would have a minimal effect on food prices or feed prices. Another misconception about the ethanol industry is that we're highly subsidized. Well, the ethanol industry in 2011, up until 2011, there was a 45-cent tax credit for the blenders of ethanol. Not the ethanol plants that were making it, the oil companies that were blending the fuel. Sure, it's an incentive for the oil companies to blend by getting that 45-cent tax credit. But since the end of 2011, no tax credits, and the ethanol industry is still alive and well, still producing. So it shows you that we don't need any subsidies. And look at the oil companies. They book record profits. Every day you hear, oh, ExxonMobil booked record profits. But they're still getting $4 billion in taxpayer support. Whereas the ethanol industry trying to compete on a level plane with the oil industry, the dollars they have with these tax credits, the only thing we have really is the renewable fuel standard. Here's just another example of how the RFS has helped reduce our dependence. So in 2006, when it was implemented, we imported about 60% of our oil. Last year, we imported 40% of our oil. So we reduced our dependence on foreign oil by a third, basically, because of the RFS. This is a funny cartoon, of course. Everyone, kind of a little political cartoon. What's the blend wall? The blend wall is basically how much ethanol we can blend right now. It's mandated, or not mandated, but it's required in most states that we have 10% ethanol in our fuel. That's basically what the renewable fuel standard is. But we've hit the blend wall. From here on out, the ethanol industry needs to blend more ethanol in the fuel supply. And there's basically what we're talking about is 15% ethanol, or E15. And we also have higher blends like E85 that's readily available at the pump. But E15, the difference between E15 and E85. So in 2011, EPA approved the use of E15 or 15% ethanol in cars 2001 or newer. And it doesn't have to be a flex fuel engine. Right now you can only use higher blends of ethanol in a flex fuel vehicle. There's only about 7 million flex fuel vehicles on the market, or some compared to there's 300 million vehicles. Or I'm not sure what the number is. I saw someone from I don't know if you know how many vehicles. You work at one of the car dealerships? I thought maybe I saw. But basically, anyway, the higher blends you can only use in a small amount of cars. But with E15, you can use it in any model, 2001 or newer, only cars, not small engines or boats. It's not approved for any of that. And it's fine. It's the most tested fuel of all time by EPA. Continuous test. There's been lawsuits by big oil on E15. Continuing. EPA continues to say it's perfect. It works fine. It will work well. So they've built this blend wall. We can't move forward because of the lawsuits. Because they've gotten AAA on our backs now, saying that if you use E15, your car is going to blow up. That's an exaggeration, but that's basically what they're scaring consumers to use E15. First of all, E15 would be in a different pump. You wouldn't accidentally. It'd be labeled, so it'd be separate than what you would use in like a 2001 or older, or a 2000 or older vehicle. So basically, they're just saying that we think big oil is simply what they're saying, building the blend wall. They've created a lot of anti-ethanol sentiment. So we're trying to reverse that, and it's really for the ethanol industry. It's about PR. We don't have the dollars that the oil industry has. It's about grassroots. It's about getting out to folks like you and talking about ethanol and answering questions. This is an open conversation. I mean, anybody can ask me a question afterwards or during the talk. But basically, one of our main image programs on a national level is working with NASCAR. Any NASCAR fans in here? All right. They've been using E15 for about 3 years now. They've driven over 3 million miles on E15. No complaints, only positive reviews from the drivers. It gives them cleaner fuel, high quality fuel, more octane, like I said earlier. This on the right, this is an ad that was on the back page of the USA Today. You see all the green flags now have American ethanol on them. All the fuel ports have American ethanol on them. The backstretch oftentimes will have American ethanol on it. The commentators will talk about Sunoco Green E15, which is the fuel they use. So in our drivers last year, Austin Dillon drove the car, as well as Kenny Wallace. I think Austin was on the major circuit, and Kenny's on the minor leagues. I can't think of the name right now, but another campaign we have is called Fuels America, and this is strictly PR, this is grassroots, going after big oil, calling them out on their tax breaks, calling them out, why aren't they returning the cost savings they're getting on ethanol, why aren't they returning that to the consumer in the form of lower gas prices? So, this is a pretty new coalition. It started less than a year ago, and it's a battle. It's turned into a PR battle now. Where can you find higher blends of ethanol, more than the 10% that's in most of our fuel? I think there's a station, I believe there's a station at the Rhodes truck stop before you go over the bridge to Illinois on the Mississippi. There's an E85 pump right there. I believe in Benton there's an E85 pump. If you go down to Sykeston, there's 2 E85 pumps. And throughout the state we have what's called in other places we have what's called a blender pump, where you can blend anything from E20, E30, E40 up to E85. It gives the consumer a better choice based on the price. But right now, the most readily available fuel is that E85 blend, which you can only use in flex fuel vehicles. Also, if you're traveling, you can click on chooseethanol.com. It'll give you a list of all the fuel stations in the country. There's an app, Flex Fuel. I put Fled Fuel. Typo. Flex Fuel Station Locator app on your iPhone or smartphone. How much time?
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure.
About your higher grades of ethanol?
Sure.
You hear people talk about E85, they say they don't get the mileage they get on normal gas.
Mm-hmm.
Comment?
You're right. You're exactly right. You lose about 15 to 20% depending on the car. People report different things, and one of the reasons is that these engines are designed to be able to run on higher blends. They're not modified to I guess use it the most efficient way. So they're more modified to run on that E10, the regular 87 unleaded. So basically, for E85 to be a cost savings to consumers, it has to be at least 40 to 45 cents less than regular gasoline. Right now it's at 50 cents. So if you're filling up with E85, you're saving money at this price. And it should always be this price because it's always less than gasoline. But sometimes the oil companies don't price it right, or it's always been less than 45 cents coming wholesale. Now sometimes it's gotten a little closer. No one knows what goes into the formula to make gas prices. It's so volatile. But to answer your question, you're right. It does decrease the mileage. But if we had an engine that was, they could use E85 in the most efficient way, you would get more or greater, or the same or greater gas mileage on E85 because it burns that fuel more completely. How much time do we have?
Just a couple minutes.
Okay, I know you guys have to get to work. Another reason, real quick, 2 things. I didn't get to talk about it today. I'd love to answer any questions, but a lot of consumers have questions about modern food production, how their food is produced, what kind of practices are used, whether it be antibiotics in cattle, or fertilizer use, or pesticide use. There's all these terms out there: organic, natural, hormone-free. And oftentimes in the mess is the consumer is lost in the shuffle because you got the 2 sides battling. So what we really want to do is reach out to consumers, talk about modern food production, be open about it, have a conversation, bridge that gap between the farmer and the consumer. And that's really what this group is, the United States Farmers and Ranchers Alliance. Go to fooddialogues.com. You can answer any question you have. If you have any questions about modern food production, talk to me afterwards. That's the website. Completely honest, completely open. We're using less fertilizer. In fact, my statistics right here. Since 1980, these messages are all about producing more with less, conservation. We're using land uses down 30%, soil erosion down 67%, irrigation down 52%, energy use down 44%, greenhouse gas emissions down 36%. So we're really trying to prove that, or show that, farmers are trying to use innovative farming practices and conserve their resources, produce more with less, continue feeding the population and and be safe about it, but also, using less and making sure that your food is readily available at a decent price. Real quick, finally, the biggest issue we have ongoing in Missouri is called Right to Farm. It's a constitutional amendment. And just to give you a brief background on this, does anybody remember Proposition B from 3 or 4 years ago? Okay, Proposition B was a piece of legislation, or actually it was an issue petition. It was funded by the Humane Society of the United States. Now, were these two girls, we talked about it at lunch, they're different than the Humane Society of the United States. They're the local shelters. The local shelters are good. The Humane Society of the United States, not good. Not good. They are a glorified lobbying firm. They give less than 1% of their funds to these guys, to the local shelters. In fact, the lady who's sitting right here, she said she voted no against Prop B. But unfortunately, Proposition B passed, and it put very harmful regulations on Missouri's large dog breeding industry. And some of those regulations might have translated or eventually been used against animal agriculture. And that's really, when you start talking about cattle in Missouri, that's when you're starting to get, into some dangerous territory, because that's a big industry in our state. And basically, after it was passed by the voters, the legislature came back in the spring of 2011 and reworked a lot of those provisions. Didn't completely change everything, they just reworked some of them so that the bad breeders were taken out of business and the good breeders could stay in business. So from that point on, we've seen HSUs come into our state continuously. They've tried to propose 1 or 2 and issue petitions, and we're more prepared now. And what we've started, unfortunately, what we have to do is put in a constitutional amendment. And this would be voted on by the public in November 2014 if passed, basically ensuring the right of farmers to engage in modern farming and ranching practices. Simply safeguarding agriculture from these outside activists, making sure that these animal welfare, make sure that animal welfare experts are guiding our laws, not outside activists. Protecting consumers from high food prices. Imagine if a regulation came in that wiped out half our livestock industry, or wiped out 3/4 of our pork industry, or something like that. Imagine how high that might, less supply, demand goes up, prices go up. So right now, just to give you the status of that bill, it passed the House, it went to the Senate. The Senate took out an amendment. So the House, it went back to the House committee. Right now it's in House committee, and it's being reworked right now. So pay attention, it's in the news. St. Louis has picked up a lot of it. Don't believe anything they say about how it's, they talk about it's bad. It's making sure that the agriculture is protected, and making sure our animals are protected. And we don't want HSUs to come in and dictate how we run things in Missouri. They've done this in other states, and we just want to be prepared in the future. So with that, that's all I have today. There's our information. If anybody has any questions, I'll be around as long as need be to talk. So I appreciate your time, and have a good rest of your day.